For many in Uzbekistan, he was the only leader they had ever known. Islam Karimov has led the former Soviet Republic since its independence in 1989. His death has now plunged the country into uncertainty. What will this mean for Uzbekistan and the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle, Carey. Islam Karimov was Uzbekistan's first and only president. He led the Central Asian country for more than 25 years, brushing off accusations of authoritarianism and brutality. For many citizens, Karimov represented stability. He defined what it meant to be Uzbek, but now he is gone. Karimov died this week at the age of 78 after suffering a stroke. His funeral was held on Saturday in his hometown, Samarkand. So what comes next, that remains unclear. Elections will be held in the next few months, but given Uzbekistan's history, they aren't expected to be free or fair. And Karimov never designated a successor. We will talk to our guests about the future of Uzbekistan in a moment. But first, Mariana Hahn takes a look back at Karimov's rule.
Islam Karimov rose to power in 1991, winning an overwhelming but questionable victory in the first presidential election following independence from what was the Soviet Union. He never let that power go. For 25 years, he ruled more than 31 million Uzbeks with an iron fist, using brutal tactics to clamp down on even the whisper of dissent. It left no room for opposition voices, and the government has been repeatedly criticised for human rights abuses, religious repression and censorship. The United Nations describes the use of torture in Uzbekistan as systematic. A former British ambassador to Uzbekistan accused Karimov's security forces of executing 2 dissidents by boiling them to death. Reporters Without Borders said Karimov frequently broke his own records for repression and paranoia. In a country where information is tightly controlled, it's difficult to know exactly what happened under Karimov's rule.
Information is not available to ordinary men. Everything you hear is subjective. No one knows what is true and what's not. The strong always judge the weak.
But there's little doubt Karimov ordered troops to put down an uprising in the eastern city of Andijan when he faced unprecedented public protests 11 years ago. And he showed disdain for any alternative view.
They took up arms and attacked the prison, releasing prisoners including murderers and terrorists. Then they came out on the streets and seized a government building, and afterwards they hold a so-called peaceful demonstration. Tell me, please, esteemed journalists, can you really believe this is true?
Officially, more than 30 troops and at least 130 so-called terrorists were killed. Unofficially, the number is 700, many of them civilians, some reportedly summarily executed by security forces. There were international protests, relations with the United States and the European Union soured. But it didn't last. 6 years later, the head of the EU Commission shook hands with the Uzbek leader to the outrage of rights groups.
It's difficult to conceive of a more ruthless leader around the world than Mr. Karimov. For him to be received warmly by Mr. Moroso is, in a sense, a culmination of this gradual capitulation to Uzbekistan and the ignoring of the principles that at one point stood behind the EU's firm response to the Andijan massacre.
Karimov's replacement is unclear. He has no obvious successor because of family infighting. His elder daughter has been under house arrest for the past 2 years since she criticised officials and family members on Twitter. Uzbekistan has never held an election judged free and fair by international monitors. His death leaves a political vacuum, an opportunity for some, a potential crisis for others.
Let us now bring in our guests in Kiev, Peter Zalmayev, director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. In London, Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First magazine. And in Brussels, joining us on Skype, Andrew Stroehlein, European Media Director at Human Rights Watch. And welcome to all of you, gentlemen. So, Peter, I want to start with you. Why the difficulty in getting timely, accurate information about the death of Karimov?
Well, in the environment of the level of repression that has been the case in Uzbekistan under the rule of President Islam Karimov, all politics has been done behind closed doors. There's been no transparency in politics. There has not been a single round of elections in Uzbekistan that's ever been held in full conformity with international standards transparently. And so this is pretty much the same kind of MO of this government, of this president. I think that there was much jockeying behind closed doors. Last-minute details were being wrinkled out in order to then be able to announce a plan of succession to the people.
Marcus, are you surprised that there has not been a line of succession already ironed out, already put in place, and understanding all of the drama and difficulty within Karimov's family?
Well, I think, first of all, when we're discussing the legacy of Islam Karimov, we really should acknowledge that President Karimov was a very competent, a very skillful, a very effective leader. And what we find ourselves today with is the question of who takes over. Now, it is very possible that the Uzbek Prime Minister will be Mr. Karimov's successor. Now, there will inevitably be a whole array of questions which will come out of Uzbekistan. If it is the Prime Minister, will he ensure the security and stability that President Karimov guaranteed? Will the Prime Minister ensure that radical Islam, which is a very, very serious internal threat in Uzbekistan, is kept down? And will the Americans attempt to court the new Uzbek leader and try and usurp Russia's position in Uzbekistan as the leading outside force? And
Marcus, we will get to all of those. Those are wonderful points that you made up, and that's definitely going to be part of this discussion. Before we get to that, though, Andrew, I'm curious from your point of view as being with Human Rights Watch, what concerns you have about the beginning of this transition period?
Well, I think, it's very easy to be pessimistic about what comes next. Karimov is the only leader that the country has ever had. He has ruled with an iron fist and just decimated any chance, any political opposition, which means that there's really no chance for kind of open political competition now after his death. So it's very easy to be pessimistic about where it goes and whether the elites can kind of agree on a plan or whether they'll fall out and we'll see some kind of violence as a result. From Human Rights Watch's standpoint, we look for 3 or 4 things. Can this new set of authorities, whoever it really ends up being, will they release political prisoners? There are thousands of political prisoners. Uzbekistan has more political prisoners than all of the former republics of the Soviet Union put together. So release those people. That would be the first thing we'd like to see. Will there be an investigation allowed into the events of the 13th of May, 2005, the Andijan massacre, when the government slaughtered at least hundreds of people, including women and children, in the streets of the city of Andijan? That's another thing we'd like to see. Will the new government end torture, systematic torture, as the UN has said, in its prisons? This is a place where prisoners have been boiled alive. So these are the kinds of things that we'd like to see the new government, the new authorities signal that they're going to make a change from this disastrous dictatorship.
So, Peter, as we begin this transition period, what about it concerns you? What is going to be on your radar that you're going to be paying attention to?
Well, I think that in order to expect a smooth transition, I think that the new government has to enter into discussions with the major powers. That would be the US and Moscow and China. I think all 3 expect that it continues to extend its assistance when it comes to anti-terrorist campaign in Afghanistan. From the very beginning in 2011, in 2001, after September 11, Uzbekistan granted NATO powers overflight rights and allowed it to base its military in order to conduct its anti-terrorist campaign in Afghanistan. So I think those guarantees have to be, continue to be extended. But also I think there's one major concern that the new person, the new president, simply will not be able to match President Karimov's ability to maintain power with an iron fist. And we're talking about over 10,000 individuals who languish in Uzbek jails, who have been imprisoned on charges of Islamic extremism. And so I think it is a potentially very explosive situation. I think that there needs to be a certain softening of the political climate. I think there needs to be a loosening of the political fetters that Karimov placed Uzbekistan in order to in order for the country to start functioning as more or less a democratic state.
Marcus, do you agree with that assessment that this is a potentially, this time that the country is entering is a potentially explosive time, explosive situation? Do you agree with that?
No, I don't believe that this is going to be an explosive time for Uzbekistan. I certainly do believe that there are legitimate concerns and anxieties amongst the Uzbek population about the future for Uzbekistan. I would also say that we hear in the West a lot of very negative stories about Uzbekistan, and I'm certainly not saying they're all unfounded, but it is very important to say this, that there were numerous successes of President Karimov's leadership of Uzbekistan. Firstly, the security and stability that the Uzbek population enjoyed in the Soviet period carried on when Uzbekistan became an independent country at the beginning of 1992. And President Karimov, he capitalized on Uzbekistan's natural resources, its hydrocarbons, its gold deposits, its copper and its cotton, and he used that in a state-run industry to ensure that people had jobs, that there were no homeless people, and that people had salaries paid on time. His second achievement was stamping out radical Islam, or keeping down radical Islam. Now, we've already heard a reference to what happened at Andijan in 2005. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't human rights abuses there, but Andijan is in the eastern parts of Uzbekistan. Andijan is a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism, second only to a neighbouring town called Hamajan, which is the heart of Islamism in Uzbekistan. A lot of the people who who were freed from that prison, a lot of the people who were responsible for violence on the streets of Andijan were hardened Islamists, the likes of which have fought in Afghanistan with the Taliban and who are now fighting with ISIS in both Syria and Iraq. And President Karimov ensured that Islamism was kept down with an iron fist in Uzbekistan. Now, that wasn't just good for Uzbekistan, that wasn't just good for the rest of Central Asia, that was good for Russia and that was good for the wider world. So we have to be fair when we discuss the legacy of President Karimov's leadership of Uzbekistan.
Okay, Andrew, I could tell that you want in on that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where your guest has his information from. I would challenge him to name one person who was a radical Islamist fighter in Andijan who subsequently went on to fight for ISIS. I would bet all the money I have that he can't do that. This is such ridiculous this is an apologist argument for this horrific dictatorship. I don't really know why you would argue for this dictatorship and the crimes it has committed. If there are today people with violent leanings in Andijan, it's because their mothers, their brothers, their sisters, and their fathers were murdered by this regime. So we really, talk to people who are actually there on the ground, people who were shot at, people who lost their family members, people whose family members had to leave Andijan, escape. They were hounded by the regime and secret police, not just inside Uzbekistan, but after they left Uzbekistan. Look, there's no reason to apologize for this regime. It serves no purpose to say that Islam Karimov created jobs. He didn't create jobs. I mean, give me a break. This is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. A handful of people around Karimov, his family, and a couple of others managed to escape with billions. There are corruption trials going on right now in several countries around the world. We look at Switzerland, the Netherlands, Sweden, the US. The amount of money that was robbed from the Uzbek people is appalling. And there's no reason to apologize. There's no reason to say that this was somehow a good thing or that he did, some good and some bad. No, this was one of the worst, most horrific regimes in the world. And, to say that it serves the purposes of Russia to say he was a good guy, or that it serves the purposes of Washington to say he was a good guy or had some good sides, or Beijing. No, all of these countries tried to play their own games. And the one group of people that nobody ever gave a damn about was the Uzbek people. And I'll tell you, they are pretty angry after a quarter century of having nothing but seeing their brothers, their sons thrown in prison and tortured.
I just want Peter to get in because he has been dying to get in as you were speaking. So, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I would also have to disagree with the speaker before the last one. I think that this is an argument, arguing that this was prosperity, stability that Karimov provided Uzbekistan and did a service to the world is sort of like saying that Uzbekistan enjoyed freedom and stability in a cage, and that's what it really was. According to global slavery rankings, Uzbekistan ranked only second to North Korea as far as its use of forced labor in its vast cotton fields. So that is just one fact that I think bears mentioning. Also, I'd like to mention that it's been a serial violator of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is the one country where children have been coerced into working long hours for free in cotton fields. Human Rights Watch was one of the organizations that I think covered this issue in a multi-year campaign to raise global awareness about the situation in Uzbekistan. And I think that to argue that he did a service, well, look at the potential after Karimov, and let's see. Let's try to imagine if the next guy will be able to maintain power with the same iron fist. I do not think that anyone who comes afterwards will be able to match Karimov's charisma and Karimov's ruthlessness. And should that person stop just short of the kind of bloodbath we saw in Andijan, where, by the way, it was not any Islamists or any extremists that started it, but according to my understanding, it was a group of local businessmen, and it was a local dispute that started it all. So if that were to happen, if that person were to stop short of that kind of response that Karimov unleashed, costing close to 1,000 lives, then imagine the kind of explosion that we would expect. Look at this. Look at the situation in Syria. Hafiz Assad maintained power for many, many years. And then when his weakling son came to power, he was unable to do that. And look at what happened in Syria. Not to say that the situation is exactly the same.
Understood.
It's very different in many respects.
Sure.
But I think it's the brutality of these regimes, the brittleness of their power that in fact can lead to a destabilization afterwards.
All three of you have mentioned the relations that Uzbekistan has with other players in the world and the role that might play going forward in this transition. Let's talk about that for just a moment. As the most populated country in Central Asia, Uzbekistan is an important player in the region. It's actually one of the more independent former Soviet nations and also shares borders with 4 other ex-Soviet states. So that makes it an important ally for the West when it comes to curbing Russian influence in the area. The U.S. also relies on Uzbekistan as a partner in so-called counterterrorism efforts, especially in Afghanistan. And China has invested heavily in recent years, particularly in roads and buildings along with the energy sector, just to kind of put this all in some sort of perspective. Marcus, how would you like to see the relationship with Uzbekistan either change or be maintained in relation to these other countries?
Well, first of all, can I just say, responding to the statements from the previous 2 guests, I am no apologist of President Karimov, and indeed I am no apologist for any other leader in the world. And I think their comments reflect a a certain degree of ignorance of Uzbekistan, and also they're viewing Uzbekistan through Western tinted spectacles. And the previous guest gave the game away when he said that President Assad is responsible for the conflict in Syria, which of course he's not. I hope both guests also
Marcus, are you disputing their facts?
Saudi Arabia. I hope both guests also condemn Saudi Arabia. But if we're talking about the future for Uzbekistan, well, I think that Russia will remain the dominant power in Uzbekistan. After all, the Uzbek people and the Russian people, they are a fraternal people. They have lived under the same roof for hundreds of years with each other. The Uzbeks, they know the Russians very well, and they trust the Russians far more than, for example, the Chinese, and far more especially than the Americans.
So who stands? Marcus, who stands to gain? Who might take advantage of this transition? Who might benefit from this transition?
Well, I think that potentially speaking, integration between Uzbekistan and Russia could increase. I think that Russia will be hoping for Uzbekistan to rejoin the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a Russian military-led association of numerous former Soviet republics. But I think also we have to watch out for the Americans. The Americans will probably try and court the new Uzbek leader and try and tear Uzbekistan away from Russia's orbit. But as I said at the beginning of this discussion, we must be very, very careful about radical Islam in Uzbekistan. And let's look for a potential response from Hamajan in the eastern part of Uzbekistan, because that is the heart of Islamism. And if the other two guests on this program are going to discard Hamajan and what it represents, then quite frankly, they are just acting in a very foolhardy way, and they do not understand the serious threat posed to Uzbekistan and Central Asia from radical Islam.
So, Peter, let's look forward. How do you see these elections actually playing out? Where do you see leadership coming from?
So I think that we can expect pretty much business as usual. I don't think there will be any drastic changes. I think for the next few months we can expect a placeholder. Maybe that will be the chair of the Senate, which is, according to the Constitution, the person who automatically assumes power in the case of the president's death. And I think that eventually we can, in 3 months' time, we can expect the current Prime Minister, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, to assume presidency. He is the most powerful man in Uzbekistan, other than the national security chief, who in fact has ruled out any sort of ambitions for the highest office. So we can expect the prime minister, who has been to become the next president. He's been the mainstay of Uzbek politics. He's been prime minister since 2003. He is seen as an ally of Russia, but I think that Uzbekistan is very wary of going fully into and embracing Russia at the expense of its relations with China and the US. I think it will continue its balancing policy of trying to maintain relations with all three powers.
Andrew, we're about out of time, but I'm going to let you have the final word. Is there any reason to believe that any of the issues that you brought up will be addressed once there is a new leader in Uzbekistan?
Yes, I think it would be wise to be very pessimistic that anything is going to change for the better, but I think this is the one opportunity that we've had in a quarter century to move away from torture, to move away from mass incarceration of political prisoners, to move maybe towards looking into the Andijan massacre in an independent way. There's been no break like this, no opportunity like this in 25 years. And although we should remain very pessimistic and things could actually get much, much worse, look, let's have one signal from this new government, from this new set of authorities. Release the political prisoners, investigate Andijan, stop using forced labor in the cotton fields, stop using systematic torture. If we can see one, even one of those as a signal, I would be starting to change from pessimistic to optimistic.
Gentlemen, thank you all for this discussion. I appreciate it. Thank you to Peter Zalmayev, Marcus Papadopoulos, and Andrew Stroehlein. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can also go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or Join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team here, bye for now.